Okay, can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, great. Um, well, I'll jump right into this. This is actually a slide from one of the organizations we're working for, the city of Edmonton, Alberta. Uh, and I want to start here because for all of the uh, more innovative budgeting work that is going on uh, these days, I mean, all of it had its start in building upon whether it's moving from line item budgeting to incremental budgeting, the whole wave of zero based budgeting, and then this focus on results based. How do we understand the outcomes that we're achieving? This is truly where our work has come in to try and build on the best elements of some of those other processes, but also advance the work. If you've been through zero based budgeting, I mean, there are some components of it that are truly a hassle, but there were some elements of zero based budgeting that were right on target, which revolved around how do we understand better the costs of what we provide. The results based budgeting movement, I don't know if you're familiar with the folks who wrote Reinventing Government, David Osborne, Peter Hutchinson. They wrote another book called The Price of Government, where they described a process called budgeting for outcomes. And I had a chance to work with public strategies as they were developing those theories. And the city of Fort Collins, Colorado was one of the first organizations to go through it. Again, that was another process that had a lot of elements that were very interesting. How do we understand what we're trying to achieve? Probably just like you're thinking through in your strategic planning committee, and then truly get a measure of how our dollars are helping us achieve those results and where we might have opportunities to consider resource reallocation or partnering opportunities, all sorts of things. So as John Johnson and I had, John's the other co-founder who's on his way to the airport actually. We're going to start working in a city in Georgia over the next couple days. But we had a chance to work together as practitioners in Jefferson County, Colorado. Randy, if you remember the webinar from a couple of years ago, we were probably much closer to those days when we were actually within Jefferson County. But when we developed priority based budgeting, it was in that county environment. And this entire body of work, what we called fiscal health and wellness, fiscal health being the foundation, almost a checkup, if you will. How do we gain a better understanding of the financial condition that we're in so that we can move forward and take on more of a long term priority based budgeting process? As you can imagine, working in a county environment, we had the challenges that come with that type of an organization that are much different than working in a city government. One of the main ones being, while we did have a board of commissioners that sets the budget, they're not in control necessarily of how our other elected officials use the budget. And so it was just a blessing that we had the chance to develop this work within a county because as we've worked in other counties, it's been able to translate very well. And as we've worked in other cities, we actually find that it's um, a cakewalk to implement in a city government. Uh, Over the last few years, we left Jefferson County in 2009, and through ICMA and the Alliance for Innovation, have had the luxury of being able to speak and promote the work. We actually do provide the facilitation and the training of the process, which I'll get into that more towards the end. But we've been lucky enough to work in organizations across the country, large, small, county government, city government, and even some special districts along the way. And it's important to us not to simply try to provide a resume, but to really say that we've had the opportunity to really test the process, make improvements as we move forward. And in almost every single situation, whether it's Cincinnati, Sacramento, Edmonton, uh, we continue to learn more that we can put back into the process. So it continues to evolve. Just last year, the International City County Management Association, ICMA, and the Alliance for Innovation formed an organization called the Center for Management Strategies. And the idea behind the Center for Management Strategies was to recognize that the members, cities and counties across the country, are truly confronted with an economic environment that is just different from what we've faced before. And the idea that we're in a downturn, and in some parts of the country they're certainly seeing some turnaround, but it's slow going. That the tools that we have need need an update. We need to be looking at emerging practices and really try to test them out to see what's working across the country. That's the intent of the Center for Management Strategies. And they're establishing leading practices in a number of areas. We were very pleased to be named as one of the first, this body of work, Fiscal Health and Wellness, which we're about to jump into. Lastly, while we're going to try and cover a lot of territory in the webinar this morning, we've had the opportunity to write extensively about the process. So I really encourage you for some more background information, and I'll be happy to send you some direct links. You don't have to go search for these, Randy. But through ICMA's professional journal and the Government Finance Officers Journal, Government Finance Review, you'll see a lot of the stories come to life, a lot more detail about the process and methodology itself. Well, let me jump into this idea of priority-based budgeting. And when John and I were in the county environment in Jefferson County, we actually used this slide back from 2007 to try and describe a little bit better what it is that we were trying to accomplish with the process. The state of California at the time, this was a headline out of a newspaper article in California, was dealing with a large shortfall, and they decided that an across-the-board budget reduction was going to be the way for them to balance the budget. And the reaction was that this approach, an across-the-board budget-cutting approach, is like a family with a personal budget shortfall deciding to cut the monthly mortgage payment, the dining out tab, and the Netflix subscription, each by that same across-the-board 10% cut, rather than eliminating the restaurant and DVD spending in order to keep up the house payments. We constantly bring this up as kind of a point of philosophy. This is what we're trying to do, is recognize that whether you have new money, new resources to add to the budget, or you actually are in the difficulty of having to make tough choices, that an across-the-board approach to it, there's got to be a better way. We wouldn't do it in our own household. Why would we do it in a local government? And it just begs the more difficult question, however, is how do you actually go through a prioritization process where you gain agreement, consensus from your elected officials, perhaps from your citizens in the community, departments within your organization, on what exactly are the mortgage payment services, if you will, of local government, as differentiated from the Netflix and dining out, which are still very valuable services to somebody. I'm a Netflix subscriber, but when we have to make difficult resource allocation decisions, we have to gain some agreement on what our priorities actually entail. So that's what the process is going to be about, how we get there. Lastly, in terms of introduction, we've been really intrigued, as I'm sure you've paid attention as well, to how the bond rating agencies, S&P and Moody's, have been put in a really interesting position over the last couple of years, as they've been challenged to come up with new ways to evaluate the financial health and the creditworthiness of communities across the country. They've taken a stance to say, as organizations, they are looking at communities who approach across the board budget cutting and saying by doing that, you avoid the tough and truly the most important discussions that we need to be having, which are, what are the impacts of these reductions, and how do we make sure, no matter what decision we're making, that they're aligned with what they call community values, the relative benefits of different services and long-term implications. I just bring this up because a number of our communities, including Douglas County, Nevada, who you might want to reach out to as well, they're one of the premier county organizations who has gone through this process, actually saw that their bond rating affirmed or confirmed and actually increased by providing priority-based budgeting as evidence that they are trying to align the budget process and resource allocation towards community values. Well, the process itself, as we work with communities, entails 5 overall steps, which I'm going to walk you through. And as we're going through this, think through areas where you might already have some of this work done. For instance, as we jump right into determining results, that might be work that you've already done or you're on your way. This is something that we're constantly looking for as we help a community get started into the implementation of the process, is how can we build on things that you might already have in place so it's not just starting over from scratch. But the logic is, if we can identify results, those main reasons why we exist as an organization, step two, if we can gain some clarity on what these results actually mean, and I'll just give you an example. Most communities we work with establish as one of their results that they want to have a safe community. That's one of the main results that they exist to achieve. When we get to the result definition phase, the step two, what we find is that in San Jose, California, they define a safe community far differently than they do in Grand Island, Nebraska. The issues are just different. And so we have to dig a little bit deeper to understand more than just the results at face value, but how do we move forward and define them so that they're unique to your organization. In step three, we're helping you to identify all of the programs that you offer. In other words, we don't move through the process comparing one department versus another department. Instead, we understand all of the programs and services offered within each department, and those are the units of operation, if you will, that go through the evaluation process in step four. Step four is a scoring process, and I'll show you some slides that detail how that works. There's two parts to scoring. There's a self-assessment where the departments are scoring their own programs, and that's followed by a peer review process where we help design some cross-functional teams to actually review the scores that the departments gave to themselves, engage in a conversation to debate whether we think the programs are actually as influential as the departments believe. And then we move out of that peer review process with some degree of certainty that yes, the scores are accurate, so that we can see this top to bottom list of programs as prioritized, and move into this last phase, which is the integration of all this information into a tool that I'll show you at the end. But it's the decision support tool, and it has all these filtering capabilities to really make sense of things as you approach the budget. So I want to walk through just briefly each of those steps, starting with results. And the question that we're asking is, what are we in business to do? Why do we have Finney County as an organization? Why do you exist? Sometimes we ask an organization, and especially the elected officials, if you disappeared tomorrow and stopped providing any services, would the citizens notice that you're gone? And of course, everybody says, that's ridiculous. Of course, they would recognize that we're not there. We say, great, that's a good sign. That's a good place to start. The next question is why? What are they missing? What are they looking for from the tax dollars that they invest? And that's what we mean by results. Here in Grand Island, as this example, you can see in terms of stewardship of the environment, safe community, strategic, sustainable, and maintained development and mobility options. These were the primary results that they established to help define why they exist. Every program that they offer should be geared towards meeting these results. They define why they have the city government. You also see down here items like financial stewardship, high quality workforce, regulatory compliance. These are also reasons why they exist, but they help define why our internal programs exist. One of the shortcomings of budgeting for outcomes, as just a quick tangent, is that they hadn't thought through yet how to evaluate the inner workings of government, the governance programs that we have. Sometimes as we start to talk to communities who have gone through some level of effort in prioritizing their programs, they say that it's easier to automatically assume that programs offered directly to citizens are of a higher priority than our internal or overhead programs. Well, that's not necessarily 100% true, or it's not a safe assumption to make, because sometimes those programs that we offer directly to our citizens depend on a quality governance. They depend on the inner workings of government to be working effectively in order for those programs to be delivered successfully to citizens. So we have two tracks that we're going on as you start to go through this process. We have community-oriented results, and community-oriented programs are scored against community results. And then we have governance results, and your internal support functions are going to score against the governance results. So they're scored against the results that really define why they exist. Lastly, you see things here like efficient services, transparent services. To the extent that your organization establishes those concepts as results as well, that's great. But we don't use them in prioritization because the belief is whether a program is more or less efficient doesn't make it more or less relevant. Every program is going to have to be put to the efficiency test, whether it's a high priority or a low priority. So we just have the community track and the governance track as we move forward in the work. With results, the next step is to dig a little deeper and try to gain an understanding of what these results actually mean. This is an example from the city of Boulder, Colorado, where over here on the left-hand side, these are their results. So you see everything from a safe community to economically vital, healthy environment and community. One of their results in Boulder, inclusive and socially thriving. If you've ever been to Boulder, Colorado, and you've walked down Pearl Street, you're going to feel included and a part of the community, whether you want to or not. And this is unique to Boulder. Results really help define why your particular organization exists. And while there is a lot of overlap community to community, some cities actually develop things that we've never seen before, inclusive and socially thriving being one of those for Boulder. And over here on the right are what we help your organization establish in terms of what we call result maps, where if this is the result in the middle, we start to gain an understanding of all the ways that you define how that result is achieved. The way that looks as we work with your community is to go through a result mapping exercise. It's a facilitated workshop. We've seen it work in a number of different ways, depending on how best to what works best for your organization. This is a great place to invite many people from your organization, not just department heads, but to actually dig in, have folks participate from within the departments. We've seen citizens participate in this exercise, but the idea is that you go through each result one by one. Here's safe community, for example, and you're asking the question, when Finney County does X, whatever that is, then we achieve a safe community. Or what does a safe community look like in Finney County? And we gather all of these responses, as many as we possibly can. And what we find is that there is some alignment around what people are saying. And we can work to try and distill what is it that people have in common as they answer that question. And those become the basis for establishing these result definitions, or those elements that go around the result map. Here's an example from Chandler, Arizona, and you see the result is safe community. What's really neat is at this point, you can clearly see elements that would immediately come to your mind, like police, fire, emergency management services, those sorts of things. You see areas about providing justice, and that's where our court systems are going to come into play. But it's not limited at traditional public safety elements. As people answered this question in Chandler, you see areas around a feeling of personal safety, that there's a visible presence of protection. You see in that bottom left, there's even an area that gets into safe activities and education for youth and families. Chandler was recognizing that they had a younger population and a lot of kids without a whole lot of things to do. And to the extent that they could be more engaged in their community, the safer that community can become. We'll see areas in safe community that have to do with safe water, air, and land, and so more on the environmental side. So I'm just trying to make the point that as we get into result definitions, you see a broad and comprehensive definition for all the ways that you achieve the result. And I'll send you these slides after the presentation as well. But here's just so you can compare two organizations who both said that they exist to achieve a safe community. Here's Wheat Ridge, Colorado. And as you go around the result map, you'll see far different definitions for that exact same result, because the issues are different in Chandler than they are in Wheat Ridge. Here is one more example, and this is for the governance result map, that internal result that we talked about. And as you look around these criteria, you see everything from managing human, physical, and technology resources to regulatory compliance. So we do the same thing on the governance side, trying to understand the definition or the answer to the question, why do we offer internal functions? Uh, Sometimes people's minds jump immediately to, especially if you have other departments working on the process, they say, well, our internal functions are here for good customer service. That's partly true, and that has to be a crucial part of the result definition. But it's also for things like stewardship. It's also for things like risk prevention and keeping our organization in line for all the regulatory compliance issues that we have. So we'll work to establish a governance result as well. Okay, so at this point we have results and we have result definitions. The next part of the process is to get into the program inventory and ask the question, what is it that we do? Again, where the work has made breakthroughs is to get beyond the traditional conversation about what's more important, the sheriff's department or the Parks and Rec department. We know the answer to that question, or you can guess how it might typically work out in some organizations. But if we can get beyond the department level and really get into all of the things that take place within the sheriff's department, and there are tons of programs, then we're really making some breakthroughs. We can understand that within every department there are going to be programs that have a high degree of relevance, and with every department there are going to be programs that have lesser degree of relevance. As we would work with you in this part of the process, we provide training to help the departments understand, well, how do we get to the right level of defining a program? What's too big? What's too small? We have tons of examples. Just over 50 organizations have now gone through priority-based budgeting. And so we have a lot of great sample inventories to share with you as well, which will help the departments get started in this work. And then not only do we have some training and some workshop time with them, but we review the programs that come back and really try to coach them to make sure, maybe they can roll a few programs together that they got too detailed in. And conversely, if they've defined programs at too large of a level, we can really help to break those down to make sure you're getting the value out of the process. There's another step in the middle of this, and that's once the departments have identified a solid program inventory, we also work with them to develop program costs. And I won't show it in this brief presentation, but there's a template, a tool that helps them do a cost allocation, essentially. That's what the tool is based on, to say if we know all of the staff members that we have in our department, we know how much their fully loaded personnel costs are, and now we know the programs that we have, can we go through and do an allocation of each staff member's time in general to the programs that they serve? And then lastly, for non-personnel related line items, how can we associate those with the programs so that we literally flip the line item budget into a program budget at that time? Okay, so now we have results. We have result definitions established, and now every department has a program inventory. It's here in step 4 that we can jump into the scoring process. Now, remember I said there are 2 phases to this: the self-assessment, where the departments score their own programs first, and then there's a peer review. Here is Boulder's scoring criteria, again, just to keep the story consistent with the city of Boulder. The main scoring criteria are going to be those results. So the logic is simple. To the extent that programs can help achieve these results to the greatest degree, programs will be prioritized. Programs that don't have an influence on achieving results will be differentiated and prioritized lower on the scale. As John and I were developing this process, however, one of the things we recognized and knew we needed to incorporate is that it wasn't alone, it wasn't enough, I should say, to only measure the program's influence on achieving results. And especially in a county government, you know this, sometimes we offer programs because we're mandated to provide the program. It might not have anything to do with results, but we're mandated to do it. So how do we take that into consideration? Or what about a program that brings in its own fees? it pays for itself. How do we take that into consideration? So these basic program attributes also are vital to the program scoring process, and we're going to be measuring the program's ability to achieve these attributes along the way as well. As they go through scoring, it's not the question, does the program achieve the result, yes or no? We really also want to give credit to programs that highly achieve the result, as differentiated from programs that have something to do with achieving the result, but it's not a high degree of impact. And then ultimately, not every program achieves all the results. So some programs won't have a score for every single one of the results overall. This is an example of the tool that we use as we go through the scoring process. It's a program scorecard. This is from San Jose. You can see for this department, it's economic development. Here are all of their programs, and it's actually a much longer list, but just for sizing purposes, we'll leave it at this. And you can see they go through and score the program against each of the attributes and against each one of the city's results. So it's not that we're trying to align programs with one result or another result or the result that they meet best. We really want to know how does the program achieve every single one of the results that we're trying to impact. In the city of Boulder, the business community really rallied behind the process as the city was implementing it. It was in the press, and they're getting a lot of attention. And we were really intrigued why the business community itself was so favorable. And they said to them, it was the closest approximation to return on investment that they'd seen in the public sector. They said, you're measuring $1 into this program. If it achieves not only one result, but two results or three results to a high degree, that's a leveraged tax dollar. It's as if that dollar is being spent again and again and again to achieve result after result after result. And that's what we want to see. That's the logic of the process. And those programs with the greatest leverage ultimately become the most highly relevant programs that we offer. Well, after the departments score their own programs, there is a quality control step, which has been really cool. And the idea behind peer review, or this quality control area, is that around each of your results, we'll help you design teams and train them as well, who will be stewards, reviewers of all the programs across the organization that indicated they have an influence on achieving the result that they're reviewing. So let's say we were all on a safe community team. First of all, we would probably have the least vested interest in reviewing these programs. So we're not coming from the sheriff's department or the DA's. We would be coming from probably the internal functions, IT, or maybe road and bridge or something like that. And we're less likely to be reviewing our own programs. We set it up that way so that by being unfamiliar with the programs, we don't assume anything. We ask more dumb questions, if you will, and really try to get a good understanding from the departments. Why did you score your program this way? What happens in the peer review process is that this is where performance measures come to life, because as we ask the question, a department will come back and share with us evidence that they might have. Sometimes it's quantitative data that they have, like literal performance measures. Other times where they don't have performance measures, that's absolutely okay. And it's more of a qualitative discussion where the department is encouraged for future years to start collecting performance measures where they haven't before. Lastly, coming out of peer review, we are fascinated by this, but we see just as many programs are scored down as they are increased in scores. We predicted when we were first starting this that peer review would be more of an arm to downgrade programs, to say departments have just been overly generous. But through their work, they're so thoughtful that they actually see, hey, the department didn't give themselves enough credit. This program actually has a lot to do with achieving this result. And so we see programs go up and scores go down as well. So coming out of the peer review process, every program has a score at this point. The score indicates how influential that program is towards achieving results, as well as those basic program attributes. And you can see here in Boulder's example, from left to right, this is the scoring scale where 100 points would have been a perfect program, 4s in every area. But while they didn't have any perfect programs, we've never seen one. So if you end up with a perfect program, it probably means that they made a deal with peer review or something like that. But you'll see here are a host of very highly influential programs, and that's what we call quartile 1. They're the most relevant programs that Boulder offers. Then we have quartile 2, just differentiated a little bit, also highly influential, just not as influential as quartile 1. Here we have quartile 3 as differentiated from the second quartile, and ultimately here in quartile 4, these are programs that scored pretty low overall in the process. We don't arbitrarily draw a line at the top 25% of programs end up in quartile 1. It's more like grading a set of test scores on a curve. There's a little bit of statistics that go into this analysis, but we want to draw these lines appropriately so that we're breaking the quartiles where they make sense. And it's also important that we're not just ranking programs one versus the other. And so, we reward program number 1 for its fantastic score. We realize that whether this program scored 2 points higher than the one below it doesn't really matter. They're both very influential. And so this grouping idea that we have quartile 1 programs provides a meaning now that these are our most influential programs overall. And then when we can put the costing together for all of those programs in quartile 1, that's what we're looking at. And here's all the programs in quartile 2. Here's all the programs in 3 and all the programs in 4. Now we see not only the number of programs that ended up in those quartiles, but how much we are investing at the quartile level. So in Boulder, when we first unveiled this picture, you can imagine their council looked at it, and one of their first questions, they said, I think this is a good thing, right? We said, yeah, this is a very healthy spending profile. The majority of your resources are going to quartile 1 and quartile 2. Again, remember, quartile 2 is very influential. But their next question was, but what does it mean to have $21.5 million in quartile 3 or $7.5 million in quartile 4? Do we just start cutting from there? And our answer to that is very firmly no. We don't know yet. All we know at this point is that these programs in 3 and 4 are less aligned with results. These do appear to be opportunity areas where we need to drive some conversations and talk about these programs, but it doesn't mean we just start cutting from the bottom. Some of those might in fact be mandated and just not meet any other results. That's going to drive a different conversation. So this picture is really the beginning of where we are when we launch into the development of the model, and this becomes the final deliverable, if you will, of the process. I just want to quickly walk you through some examples and then open it up for some questions, but I want to show you how this works. This is that Boulder picture again, and as you can see, the field up here, the first filter, shows that we've selected the community-oriented programs. So remember, we have the community track and the governance track. If we wanted to look at the governance programs, we could. And as you see here, it's not a bad array. This is actually very healthy as well. A lot of quartile 2 spending and some quartile 1, but not as healthy as the community array. And in Boulder's case, they definitely recognize that they had some quartile 3 and quartile 4 opportunities to take a look at. But think about it, back to that original discussion when I was saying some communities make the automatic assumption that programs offered directly to citizens, or community programs in our language, are automatically more important than our internal overhead programs. In this case, we prove it's not true. Look at all of these quartile 1 and quartile 2 programs, just as relevant as the quartile 1 and quartile 2 programs offered on the community side. So by understanding this, of course, we have opportunities to explore and analyze, but we also have achieved a breakthrough that not all overhead programs are secondary. We can put all the programs back together and look at the entire citywide array. Here in this next filter, while we've just been looking at programs and the overall program costs, we also keep track of the accounting funds, because ultimately we still have to budget at the fund level. So if we wanted to just explore the general fund, we could isolate only those general fund resources and approach balancing the budget here at the fund level. Next, we have the department filter. And so again, while we've looked at all of the programs within departments, it's important that we have the ability to reassemble the picture. And especially as this becomes a vital tool for the departments themselves, they want to see how their programs did and where their opportunities are for taking a look at their resource allocation decisions. I'll just show you a couple examples. Whoop. Sorry, there's my little alarm clock. Here's the police department in Boulder. So not surprisingly, a lot of quartile 1 and quartile 2 programs. They're top heavy. And people ask, well, is that just because it's public safety? It's inevitable that their programs are going to land at the top. We say no. Our intuition says that because we know inside that so many of the programs offered in these public safety departments have a high degree of influence on not just one but multiple results. They make our community safer. They help with our economy to the extent that people feel safe shopping downtown. They help with our transportation objectives as our roads are safer and people can move around our city more safely. But what do you also see? That even in the police department, we have quartile 3 and quartile 4 programs. When John and I first unveiled this in the city of Boulder, we wondered, is this the end of priority-based budgeting? How do we explain to the police department that they have quartile 4 programs? And we talked to the police chief, and he said, I have complete buy-in in the process. And we said, why? And he said, because we scored our own programs. By having that self-assessment component, he recognized that, yeah, not everything that they do has the utmost influence on every single one of their results. He knew just by self-scoring that he was going to have some quartile 3 and quartile 4, but that's okay because overall their balance, their overall spending profile is so positive, they end up doing better in the budget process anyway. But this is really, really crucial. Even in police, they have programs to work on and discussions to have. I'll show you this last one. In Boulder, their Parks and Rec department was very fee oriented. Many of their programs had a charge for service. And as they had a very healthy spending profile as well. But as we get to this last filter, we can pull out those program revenues because it's not as if a program that's bringing in money, if we cut that program, those fees don't continue to come in. Those fees and charges would go away as well. So we can peel those out and only focus on the general government resources where we truly have the ability to talk about reallocating resources from program to program. Or talking about, hey, here in Parks and Rec, we were led to believe that the entire department paid for itself. But here we see, here's the subsidized element, the general government resources, funding quartile 3 and quartile 4 programs. Maybe we have an opportunity to increase our fees or make sure that they're commensurate with the level of service that we're providing. Last thing I'll show you, and then conclude and open it up for some questions, is you'll recognize these scoring criteria. These are all of the ways that the programs were scored. And so far, we've only used them to talk about the degree to which a program is going to be quartile 1 or quartile 4. But where this gets really interesting is that we can put all this information to use. For instance, if we wanted to look at just the programs and follow me because I didn't go through the entire explanation of the scoring scale in the attributes, but in the mandated category, scoring a 4 meant that the program is mandated by the federal or state government. It's a very high degree of mandate. So if we turn on that filter, all we're going to see are programs that meet that criteria. They're mandated by the federal or state government. As we come back to the main picture, so many of the programs we see ended up in quartile 1 and quartile 2. They're mandated, but they also achieve results to a high degree. That's how you get to quartile 1 and quartile 2. But we also see some programs here in quartile 3 and quartile 4. Fascinating. Mandated by the federal or state government, but very low on the priority scale. What does that mean? Well, back to our original discussion, sometimes we automatically say because a program can play the mandate card that we launch it to the top of any of our priority discussions. We can't touch it. It's off the table for discussion. In our process, we have learned something different. If it's low, it means we're mandated to do it, but it's not important to us. It's not achieving results. So what does the mandate really require us to do? And is there potential that we're over-delivering on the mandate? Some communities are even saying, what's the penalty for not achieving the mandate? And if the penalty is of less cost and less consequence than what we spend on providing the program, maybe we should have that discussion. We're not advocating specifically for that, but that's the kind of dialogue that it allows us to entertain. I'll show you one more filter. Here in the reliance to provide the service, the question that we're asking here is, are there other service providers, be it on the public sector side or the private sector? And if I go on the lower end of the reliance, what we're going to see are programs where Boulder identified that there are other potential service providers. So we come back to this main picture. Okay, this is fascinating. Maybe some of these programs pay for themselves, however. So let's take out some of those program revenues. So now we're just looking at programs that somebody else has been identified who provides it, maybe in the public sector, also maybe in the private sector. and we're subsidizing these programs. We've taken out all the program revenue. Some of them are quartile 1 and quartile 2. And the question here is, they're very important to us, but somebody else is doing it. Maybe we should partner. What's the opportunity we have to get more efficient by partnering up on these on the provision of these services? However, in quartile 3 and quartile 4, a totally different conversation. Somebody else is doing it, and it's not important to us. We don't necessarily want to partner. We might ask ourselves the question, why are we in this business? Are we sure we want to be the main service provider? For the other service provider who's offering the service, what can we do to help them take on the service entirely? So completely different conversations depending on these filters. And if we had another hour, we can go through all of the policy related questions with the filters, but just wanted to give you a taste of how this wraps up. Before I turn it back, I want to go back to the presentation and go all the way back to the beginning and the steps, because I know one of your questions was, how does the Center for Priority-Based Budgeting work with communities to implement the process? We have helped in various ways. Some organizations really feel that if we can just teach you how to get going in the process and provide the templates and certainly load your data into the final model, that's the way you want to go. Other communities, we have a very hands-on role where we're there on site helping you define results, the result definitions, working with your board and the elected officials, working with citizen groups if that's what you desire, and there are places where it makes sense to bring them into the work. And then in all cases, we're providing the training, the templates for developing a program inventory, the program scoring process, peer review, and then pulling it all together for the final model. Just so you know, and we're trying to be very transparent, we work with ICMA and the Alliance for Innovation for a reason. John and I formed this company initially as part of an incubator within a nonprofit. While we are out of that incubator and we actually have a company, we're entirely mission driven about this work. We just want to see it spread, and we're seeing such great things take place. But we didn't get in this to build a business. We happen to have some work that is meaningful. I say that as a prelude to let you know about what the costs usually entail. For a very large community like a Cincinnati or an Edmonton, our costs can be upwards towards around $50,000 to provide the process. Now, and that's the tools and that's everything included, and it's a one-time cost. And you can take that and run with it. The process is yours. You can load the tool in future years. A lot of communities feel like, hey, that's fantastic. That's not a large price tag. We still are always sensitive to wanting to make sure this is very affordable for every organization. On the lower end of the spectrum, where we still have a lot of work to do with community, but it's smaller, we can anticipate being closer to the $36,000 or $38,000 level. That's on the lower end of the scale. So somewhere in between there. Clearly, you guys aren't the size of Cincinnati or Edmonton, so I'd anticipate you'd be on the lower end of the spectrum. And then to the extent that maybe you already have results in place, so you have certain elements already completed, we work from there to say, hey, you don't need this step of the process. We can build on what you've already achieved. So I just wanted to let you know that as I turn it back over to you all for questions, that's how we work.
Okay. I actually have a question. This is Katrina. A lot of the things that you talked about have been working with cities. This will work with a county agency? Absolutely.
So, and I should have made even more of a point of this, but it was developed originally when John and I worked within a county. So the very first implementation was Jefferson County, Colorado. I also want to connect you guys, especially with Douglas County, Nevada, which is in the Reno, Lake Tahoe area. Massive challenges in that organization in the state of Nevada in general. But I want you to talk to those folks about specifically how it worked in a county. But yeah, it's very important to us that it's been implemented many times in county organizations. Counties are different than cities, as you know.
I just had so many things pinging through my head of how this could work. Does it make sense?
Awesome.
I don't really have a lot of questions. I just kind of want to see how it works, refresh my memory, and then obviously costs, and how it, would work for Finney County. That's kind of.
Well, one question I would have is, as you're thinking through your timing, imagine that you did um, jump into the process. We've implemented. Now you have the tool itself. At one point, when would you want to have that? And maybe we could even work backwards and start to think through what it might look like in terms of implementation.
I guess. Well, yeah. How long would it take? What's that time frame? We do our budgets because it ends up being a budget issue. Obviously, the budget process. We start our capital process around February, March of the year. We start the operating budget in March, April, May.
Uh-huh.
County Commission adopts the budget at the end of July, 1st of August for the next calendar year.
Very good. So in that case, and communities have handled it a little bit differently, the entire process usually takes us about 4 months. Now, that's not 4 months of day in and day out work by any stretch of the imagination. It's 4 months because imagine step 3, we're in program inventories. We want to allow the departments to have at least about 3 weeks to complete that task, and half of them are going to be on vacation. They'll have their normal work to do. So while it takes them about 2 days to complete that step, we want to offer a nice large window of time so that they don't feel stressed out. It's a nice, comfortable implementation. That's not to say if you wanted to increase the pace of implementing the process, if you were to get started in, say, January, that you couldn't be completed by March or into April and have the tool to really dive into and have discussions that would potentially shape the way that you're approaching the budget for 14-15. Another option is, let's say you got started or felt comfortable, you have the buy-in to move forward, but you want to stretch it out over a 2-year phase-in. That's completely reasonable as well. So in that case, maybe you spend the first few months really focusing on results, result definitions, and those program inventories. You go through your normal budget process, but then you could pick this back up again in July and August, and then you'd have it completely ready for the next year. Those are just 2 options. I mean, we are very comfortable in helping, no matter what the approach is, just making sure that it ends up being very effective and you can use the model.
Okay. I guess the other question would be, what would we need to do to get a cost estimate?
Oh, we can put together a proposal, no problem. A couple of things that we would like you to consider, or share with us any information that you have. If you, in listening to the presentation, if you believe that you have anything in terms of a strategic plan, vision, mission, goals, objectives that come from your elected officials that we might be able to build on for results, we can certainly take that into consideration as we build the proposal. Otherwise, if you think, actually we don't have results, and it's a great opportunity to start that discussion with the board, we'll just assume that we are starting at that level where we need to determine results from step 1, and we'll build the proposal that way. We can have something back to you, certainly after the Thanksgiving holiday, but early December without a problem, and we can send it over and maybe talk through it to refine it a little bit from there, if that made sense.
Yeah, and I had emailed to Eric Fabian.
Yes.
I think.
Yep.
Our strategic plan that the commission, it's a draft version. They haven't formally adopted it because there's a few changes, but it goes over some basic strategic goals, that not all of them are budgetary, but it does talk, it does talk about like maximize stewardship of county revenues and broaden the use of non-property tax revenues, contribute to community problem solving, quality of life,
Excellent.
high-performing county workforce to deliver services. It has a little bit of that stuff from the county commission.
And I totally apologize. Eric did tell me that you sent that over to him, but I hadn't dove right into it yet. So I will access that and take a look at it. I don't think that you do need to send me anything else.
Okay.
Um,
And I don't know what the direction of the commission is with the proposal, but I would at least like to have a discussion with them to see if they have any interest.
Sure. And you know, another thing to put out there, if you really think that, hey, this has a possibility, but the commission could use a presentation as well, two things. One, we're always happy to do, clearly we'd be happy to do another webinar if you think it would help the commission gain a appreciation for what this is all about. And then secondly, I have access through GoToMeeting, the web service that we use, to send you a recording of this session. So you can certainly play that for the commission as well.
Okay, yeah, that may be a good thing. Just that way they can watch it on their own time.
Yeah, that'd be great. No problem. I'll send that over to you on YouTube.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Great. Okay. Any other questions? This has been awesome. I'm excited. I really hope that we can gain some momentum here.
Okay, all right, yeah. I think it was a great webinar. It's interesting process, but I don't think we have any other questions at this time.
Okay. Well, Randy, I'll follow up with you on both the proposal end, but even before that, the recording of the session. And then, yeah, we can just take it from there.
Okay, sounds great.
All right. Hope you guys all have a great Thanksgiving.
All right, thanks, you too.
Thank you.
Bye.